Welcome back, folks. We thank you for re-engaging in what is the last session for the first day of our mid-year briefing. And before I introduce our panelists, I'll just speak to the great accomplishments of our first day. We've spoken about the operational challenges within our justice community. We've heard from practitioners with regard to their daily challenges in doing their job as most effectively as possible. We've spoken to representatives from the community speaking to their needs as it relates to officer wellness or practitioner wellness, I should say. We've talked about the representative type of tools that are out there to access the data. Ultimately, we've come down to three themes. There is the need for training and education, which doesn't surprise us. There is the need for addressing the people aspect of these initiatives in these programs on a national basis, or culture change. And ultimately, most fundamentally, there is the need to access the data. Accessing the data, whether we are slicing and dicing it, whether we're looking to retrieve it under the correct policy guidelines, et cetera, is really the focus of the next panel. Enabling that access to data through a NEIM National Information Exchange Model program is what our three panelists are going to talk to us about today. For those of you that have been part of the justice community for more than a couple of days, you've all heard of NEIM, but what will be important to us is to understand what are the new activities and the new horizons for the program. We have the managing director, Katherine Escobar, who is the managing director for the program and will share with us not only her experiences to date, but maybe some of the priorities that she anticipates addressing in the future. And then we have two co-chairs to the state, local, tribal, and territorial Tiger team. And that is Mr. Michael Phillips, who will be joining us. And last but certainly not least, our executive director emeritus, Paul WOrmelo, who is also one of those co-chairs. He's founder of WOrmelo Consultancy, and of course he's been referenced. His name has been used in vain throughout the day. So welcome to you all. We are looking forward to understanding what's been happening recently in NEIM, and we're looking forward to understanding how the IJIS community can support some of your priorities moving forward. So Paul, you've done us the great honor of helping us moderate this panel, so I will turn it over to you. You're on mute, so there you go.
Thank you, Maria. We appreciate your having us join this wonderful symposium you've organized. And I have to say, I'm just delighted with the presentations that we've heard throughout the day, and particularly Judge Mack setting the stage for this discussion this morning when she talked about the need to define the data elements that need to be exchanged across the criminal justice world. So I think we're responding directly to Judge Mack in this hour, but also to the long-term involvement of IJIS in this effort. I was just thinking about, I just got involved in the origin of NEIM as long as 18 years ago, when we were very actively involved in supporting the predecessor to NEIM, the Global Justice XML data model, in which we helped design the governance process. We helped form the committees, the Business Architecture Committee and the Technical Architecture Committee, members of the IJIS staff, and members of the companies who belong to IJIS actively engaged in those early committee days to help get this off the ground, recognizing on behalf of all the member companies that standards are a very critically important part of this whole notion. And as Judge Mack so eloquently stated this morning, that unless we define the data elements in a way that they can be understood across the domains with whom we're trying to communicate, we will never get to the point of having information sharing as a reality, particularly in an automated way. So I'm delighted to be here with you today and be back talking with you about what's happening with NEIM. Our purpose today is to really just bring you up to speed on what's been happening very recently and what is about to happen with NEIM that you may find interesting and useful in your work, whether you're an industry or a practitioner. We're going to not dwell on a great deal of technical detail, but I have two very important friends in this discussion today that I want to introduce you a little bit more to. My co-chair, Mike Phillips, who will also speak in this august body, is Vice President of SL Innovations, a company that helps state and local government with data management and cybersecurity issues. And Mike has been involved in NEIM for a couple of decades, as have I, building actual exchanges years ago. And he and I have been tapped to be co-chairs of this Tiger team that address state, local, tribal, and territorial needs and try to help create a two-way street between the field and the NEIM hierarchy and committee. So we'll talk more about that later. But our most important panelist on this meeting today is Katherine Escobar. Katherine is actually the Deputy Chief of the Data and Standards Division in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, but she's been tapped to be the Managing Director of NEIM, representing the Department of Defense. But Katherine plays the key role in working with all of the different domains, and including emerging domains and existing domains and the committees, and providing a limited amount of staff. We'll talk a little bit more about how that works. But Katherine is a delightful addition to this whole effort. She, I could tell this a little bit story to you, since some of you have a development background. Katherine's a real live technologist and not just a policy wonk that got misplaced into this position. She has more certificates from CompTIA than probably most of you on the call, and a long history of actually solving IT problems. And she understands issues of databases and privacy and security. And I only sort of joke about the fact that when Katherine joined the federal government, the average competency of federal employees went up about 20%. So we're very happy to have her in this role as the managing director. And it's really an honor to have her with us today to give you from the top the explanation of what's going on with NEIM and why it's relevant to you, and how you might be excited by some of the things that are happening. So that's really what we're going to attempt to do today, and open up some lines of communication. So I'm hoping that Alex will allow me to share my screen. Which I can't do right now. There we go. And we'll use a few PowerPoint slides to help us do this with you, and bring you up to speed on what's going on with we're going to take turns talking about what's happening and give you both an introduction and an update. I know there's probably a few of you, not very many, I hope, but a few of you who don't really know what NEIM is. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we thought it'd be helpful to play a short video that is more succinct than any wandering and rambling message that I might give you on what is NEIM, just in case you're fairly new to it. And then we'll go on to peel some more layers off the onion as we explain what's going on. But take a look at this introduction, and just so you can get an idea of what NEIM really is.
What is NEIM? NEIM stands for the National Information Exchange Model, a common vocabulary that enables efficient information exchange across diverse public and private organizations. What do we mean by common vocabulary? To exchange information, computer systems need to be able to speak to and understand each other when using different terms that actually mean the same thing. NEIM lets your system and my system speak to and understand each other, even if they've never spoken before, by ensuring that information carries the same consistent meaning, Let's say 3 organizations identify the need to exchange information related to a person. Their information, though similar, is defined differently. All organizations have a concept of a person's last name. One refers to it as last name, while another refers to it as surname, while the third refers to it as family name. The same concept, but different defining terms. Using NEIM, organizations come together to agree on a common vocabulary. Rather than starting from scratch, NEIM provides agreed upon terms, definitions, relationships, and formats, independent of how data is stored in individual systems, so that last name, surname, and family name all mean the same thing, person surname, once they're mapped to NEIM. And now, thanks to NEIM, this exchange can be expanded beyond these 3 organizations, so that when a 4th, 5th, or 20th organization wants to join the conversation, this initial exchange can be easily understood and reused, saving time and money. So how does NEIM work? There are 2 concepts that help illustrate NEIM and how it works. The first is common language. NEIM is a reference model that includes community-specific content, as well as core content, with common terms that are agreed upon by all the communities that use NEIM. In this way, NEIM ensures interoperability, because all information used in NEIM-based exchanges use consistent definitions. For example, a few of the most common elements in the NEIM core include person, location, item, organization, and activity. The diverse communities that leverage NEIM collaboratively govern the model. Community subject matter experts develop reusable content in NEIM to meet community needs. As those needs evolve, NEIM allows for flexibility and growth. The second concept to explain how NEIM works is the exchange development lifecycle. This repeatable, reusable process for using the NEIM model to define an information exchange makes the development of exchanges faster, more efficient, and more cost-effective. So now you know what NEIM is in a nutshell, but there is so much more to learn. So visit our website at neim.gov to learn more. Also, help us spread the word by sharing this video.
So there you have it in a nutshell, but I can boil this down to really simple terms that everybody can understand. NEIM has a simple mission. It's to facilitate interagency and cross-domain information exchanges. So like-minded agencies, whether it's in law enforcement, courts, prosecutor, corrections, can exchange data with each other and across those domains, but also with the domains outside of the criminal justice system. As we hear more and more of a need to arrange for communications and information sharing between criminal justice and health and human services and education and other domains, NEIM provides that common language and common capability to do that. So this is what we're all about, and I think it's true that IJIS has been a pretty formidable force in all of this over the years, as we've not only provided training, we ran the initial courses that were done to provide regional training around the country. We provided a help desk. We've had people and members from IJIS serving on all the committees in NEIM since its inception. So that's kind of where we've been. So there are all kinds of exchanges that have been built based on NEIM. You may be using some of these already, even if you don't know it, like the FBI NIBRS and Index reporting system is all based on a message specification that the FBI developed that's conformant with NEIM. They're making an effort to have all of the NCIC messages conform to NEIM. The CDC has actually come out with a standard exchange for emergency management data that's based on NEIM. The National Interstate Compact Enterprise, NEIS, for placing children in foster care across state lines. It uses NEIM, and that work was done again by an IJIS member company. The Indian Welfare Act and many others, Amber Alert, NLETS uses NEIM in many different ways. So this is not something that's an idle chatter. This is an actual capability and framework that's been developed to help you make information sharing a reality. So Mike, you want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this?
Absolutely. And it's an honor to be presenting today. As you see, the pieces of this puzzle coming together and highlighting a disaster. What we've found, and 9/11 helped to bring this to bear, is we discovered that a lot of the pieces of the puzzle that would allow us to have proactively maybe head off incidents like this already existed in local police departments, state systems, federal systems, but none of it was connected. So there was no shared intelligence. There wasn't an ability to search through here and look for suspicious activities that might have had some things in common, like suspicious people checking out electric grids or power stations across the state or across the country at the same time. So the idea was we had to come up with a way to share data. And one specific example, like in the state of Florida, we had Muhammad Atta got trained how to fly in the Miami area and lived in that area and ended up having a warrant for his arrest. And so he was driving in North Florida and got pulled over for a traffic violation. And because at that time, the systems weren't really sharing that much, it was not known that there was an outstanding warrant for him, and they let him go on his merry way. And the rest is history. Since then, Florida used NEIM to connect over 200 law enforcement agencies to share, incident reports, suspicious activities, and, just share the things that needed to be shared to be able to start heading that type of thing off. And now if there's a warrant anywhere in the state, they get held. Everyone knows about it. But the main thing is getting with NEIM, it gives you a common vocabulary, and it gives you an entree into making cultural change, which was necessary to get everybody to cooperate. And the reason, again, for NEIM is, I've talked about these silos. People have their systems, and they are rightfully protective of that because they have to protect the security of that private information and sensitive information. But we have to get past that to realize that the information that you have is needed by many, and putting in appropriate ways to get at that information and still be confident that it's secured and can share it. There was the lack of consensus on data standards, which NEIM to the rescue. A common Rosetta Stone of data definitions that both state and local, tribal, territorial can rally around, but all the vendors that support systems can rally around these standards. And culturally, I've touched on that with it's my data, not yours, and just the willingness to open up to other jurisdictions. And then the lack of resources for making these improvements. You need education on how to create exchanges, which we'll share coming up, ways that you can get training and support to create these critical data exchanges.
Yes, and so NEIM can't solve all those problems. We don't claim that they do. We're certainly not going to solve the cultural problems that Maria and others talked about earlier today, although we know they have to be solved. But there are two things that NEIM contributes to solving this problem that are pretty powerful. The first is semantic interoperability. That's agreeing on the meaning of terms, which is a major effort that was initiated early on in NEIM, and is really the heart of the data model that is the National Information Exchange model. Getting agreement on terms like case, for example, across all of the domains. You all know that there's a lot of difference in the meaning of the word case in a police department versus a prosecutor versus a court versus a correctional agency, and getting a common definition that computers could interpret and use is critically important part and really kind of the basic functionality that NEIM contributes. But it also contributes syntactic interoperability. That is to say, standards for how data is represented, how those different terms are represented. I think right now we have something like 16,000 terms that have been harmonized across all of the participants in the NEIM community that work to help with this problem. And that's really what NEIM does for the whole criminal justice community as well as other domains. All of this is being done by a community. This is not a federally imposed issue. The federal government doesn't decide what the standards are. The community decides, and they're the voices of NEIM, and there's 3,000 or 4,000 people involved in this around the country, come from local, state, federal, tribal, territorial, international, and the private sector being heavily populated by members of IJIS to participate in defining what NEIM is, what the data elements are, and how it operates. And this whole community operates on 3 fundamental principles. The first is collaboration. All of these agencies work together, and people come together in committees or task forces and voices about NEIM to collaborate to figure out how to make information sharing a reality using this national framework. The second thing is equality. Everybody's got an equal voice in this in terms of defining what's needed and how it ought to operate. It's not something that's just imposed upon us by the federal government or some other sector. And the third is consensus. The decision-making in NEIM has always been from its outset one of consensual collaboration and coming together until we reach a consensus on how to do things and make this helpful. This community is the essential support mechanism, and IJIS has been involved in this community in all kinds of ways from the very beginning. It still is today. I have to mention people like Mike Hume from Unisys, who Mike was involved in the global justice XML work and actually was one of the guys who decided how to name some of the documents that we built. And he's still involved in one of the NEIM committees. And, you know, this kind of long-term commitment over 18 years is what's kept IJIS up to being an important force in the future development of NEIM. So to sort of loosely manage that whole community, the NEIM Community governance model is a very slimmed down, efficient model. It's operated by an executive steering council, which consists of the CIOs from the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Defense. And those are really the sponsoring agencies that keep NEIM going. And from the very beginning, the idea was to have a very small but mighty management office that would coordinate all these activities of the community and have a managing director. And we have that managing director here with us today in terms of Katherine Escobar. And under that little program office, Katherine has a small staff to help with some of the functions, but she works mainly through the 2 committees that were designed to have a mixture of state, local, tribal, territorial, and the private sector in their work. One is the NEIM Technical Architecture Committee, which deals with all the model building and the specifications and the conformance rules and that sort of thing. And that's composed of people from the stakeholder community, including industry, who make the decisions on the architecture and what direction NEIM goes, and bring those decisions up, recommendations up to the Executive Steering Council when needed. The other committee is the Business Architecture Committee, and that's where all the hard work is done in harmonizing the data elements, and has been done this over many, many years. And a lot of this started with a small group of people from the state and local world, really, who got together and said, what kind of data elements do we need? And what should be in this model? And it's now represented by the individual organizations that are the stewards of the various domains. make their a party to the whole NEIM community, and including the IEPD developers, people who build the message specifications, and people who contribute to the operations side of NEIM. It's those people that really deal with the semantic issues and the content for what does data mean and how do we share it so effectively, and what are the requirements for information sharing across all of these domains. So that's how this thing happens. And I think we're going to take advantage of Katherine joining us today to ask her as the managing director to tell us a little bit about what's happened recently with NEIM, and also what's likely to be happening in this coming year and beyond. So Katherine.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul, for the warm welcome and wonderful introduction. I apologize if you lose me. I'm having very spotty internet connection. So if that happens and I suddenly stop talking or moving, Paul, if you'll jump back in. Anyway,
You bet.
so there is a lot of history and wealth in the domains and in the NEIM community overall. And as Paul mentioned, IJIS has been an integral part. Very exciting to be part of this program. So what you'll see right now is that we currently have 14 domains and one onboarding as our newest domain, this building content as we speak with the state, local, tribal, territorial organizations for federal reporting of cyber incidents. Which we have, if you'll go ahead and build the slide, Paul, we also have 2 additional domains coming on board, statistics, who will be led by the Census Bureau. So as many of you probably remember, we just finished the decennial census, and that was all behind the scenes done with NEIM Exchanges. So we're pretty excited to claim that that wonderful event, but also Bureau is looking to outreach to all the statistics organizations as stakeholders to bring in additional types of content that are required and needed for these important information, information pieces. So learning and development, other major domain coming on board. We have an organization called ADL, Advanced Distributed Learning, and using the various existing frameworks, standards that are specifically in the education space, but also to extend the education space, the other parts of NEIM. So as you heard in the video, NEIM is greater than any one given space or business area. Each of the domains represent a business area, and then we have the core, which would go across all of these business areas. So we're very excited about these 2 new domains as well. Next slide, please. So speaking to that, the NEIM core has the concepts or the vocabulary that would be across all domains. And in the video, it was mentioning person's last name. So the concept of a person, everybody would be pretty familiar with needing to exchange information about that. And you would have things like first name, last name, social security number, birthday. But then within the domain context, that's where you would elaborate on that. And in the justice domains in particular, you would be talking about possibly your police officer, your victim, or maybe your perpetrator, or I'm sorry, the name escapes me, the vocabulary is your suspect. And you would have elaborative information that would be very specific to the justice domain. But where this comes into play with the rest of domains is when you have to speak outside your immediate genre. So the justice departments, the at the federal, state, local government have to exchange data, say with hospitals. Maybe the hospitals have patients who have entered who are victims of crimes, or maybe they were part of a major incident like Mike was talking about earlier with 9/11. And then you have the domain specific elements that come into play to be able to exchange across each other. Next slide, please. So with all of that said, NEIM has been a very stable environment, has over 12,000 data elements and growing, as you can possibly imagine. And with the beginning of NEIM, it was very tightly coupled with XML. And the community of late has said, you know, we really need to be able to expand beyond XML. There are other formats out there, such as JSON, YAML, that starting to adopt to improve efficiencies and improve communications. And so if you'll continue to build the slide, Paul, what we'll talk about is in our most recent release of NEIM 5.0, which went out in December of last year, we launched what's called a meta model. We are decoupling the XML from NEIM and creating a model that you can now have specifications in any
in all kinds of different
and with that
environments.
we have that so I don't know if you're having trouble.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, Katherine, but the exciting thing about the meta model is it lets people use the most advanced information technology development tools to build those exchanges and not be limited to XML. This is a really advanced thinking because, as many of you know, XML was the typical way that information exchanges were designed and built even before NEIM was around, as the computer companies all agreed on this common standard. But it's tools like JSON have come about to make it easier and faster to build exchanges, and so NEIM is catching up with those kinds of things. But one of the most exciting things to me is that in this meta model that's being developed, so that we can use alternative different metrics and measures and ways to create these exchanges. One of the things that you'll be able to do is to represent NEIM in an RDF and OWL kinds of format, which really empowers people to build out the kind of knowledge graphs that Bob Parker was telling you about at lunch today. That, you know, the ability to have an RDF OWL advanced notion that as a representation of the NEIM model, and to make development then really easier and make much more powerful solutions out of it. So, Katherine, can you talk without your video on?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're on the tools catalog and support services. Go ahead.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so as Paul mentioned, there are great advances happening right now in NEIM as we move forward. In addition to expanding NEIM's ability to communicate in different formats, we're also building tools to make it easier to build those exchanges. So there's a tools catalog that helps you with building the IEPD and access other IEPDs that may have been shared by other organizations. What we find is that a lot of organizations, especially within a domain, you know, can reuse those IEPDs and really reduce the cost of. So this has been an excellent tool for us to provide. You can access those tools on neim.gov and all of the technical support and exchange information. Additionally, we have online training Much of this is basically at the very deep hearts of most developers. And so it's very well written, very good stuff. But we also have training materials available to be able to do engagements such as this, where we could do briefings. And then the last thing is I am working with the community to call it a stable of qualified professionals who can do training for organizations and make their information available online. Right now, I have some names and some contacts information. So if you're looking for somebody immediately, just let me know. Just reach out to me, and I'm happy to give those names and contact information to. And then lastly, the migration and other technical assistance. So the NEIM Management Office, as well as our lead developer, are available. So if you need help, if you are working on a current solution, you're welcome to reach in to the NEIM Management Office to seek assistance. And if we can't give it to you directly, or if you need just, again, a list of professionals that you'd like to contract for hire, we have names so that you could have dedicated support. Either way is open to us. Next slide.
Yeah, so Mike, we're going to ask you to talk a little bit about the standards that have been developed based on NEIM.
Well, lots has happened in the 20 years that we've been doing this, Paul, and there's been great strides towards standardization in various areas. And we're proud to see that NEIM is showing up in some ANSI standards. I mean, I could go through all these. I think you're all going to get a copy of this deck, but, OASIS, XLDL, the Emergency Data Exchange language for FEMA, Big Data Framework at NIST, Fire Protection, Emergency Incident Data Document, biometrics, and on, and it's growing. And I know that Katherine is seeking other avenues to increase the standardization of NEIM at a higher level even. And so we're very excited about this evolution, and stay tuned, as more and more of these come about.
I just want to add a couple of notes of interest to IJIS. The APCO alarm monitoring exchange standard that's now being used by the alarm monitoring companies that go to dispatch centers was a project that was initiated by IJIS and sponsored by IJIS to work with the alarm monitoring field, and also a pilot project in an actual 911 center that resulted in that APCO standard, which APCO turned into an ANSI standard. So it's a real live standard. Also, one of the most recent ones that had just come out, if you haven't heard about it, is the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria that the Department of Transportation came out with a standard, IEPD, basically, to define that minimum uniform crash criteria, which is helpful to the states as they look for guidelines in how to submit their data.
And I know some organizations like county integrated justice efforts and things sort of de facto have agreed to adopt NEIM as their standard, and they get their vendors and everyone to rally around that. If you're going to do business in jurisdiction X, you got to make your product, align with NEIM. So, it's necessity sort of comes in when you got to have a standard you need to follow. There's a business case for NEIM, and when you're trying to convince people or get people on board, certainly we've talked about collaboration. This is an excellent way to get people to start speaking the same language in terms of what's this mean, what's that mean, and then how does it cross over from this domain to that domain, and so that consistency, becomes ingrained in your organization on how you look at data and how you approach sharing data, and especially in the way you develop it. If you're developing standard exchanges through the information exchange, packet process, you can, there's a lot of training and guidance available on how to do that. And the beauty of it is that in support, those exchanges can be reused across the country. You don't have to start from the beginning, but in support, we do try to help anybody who needs it, with presentations to executives, to lining your developers up with the right place to get it done. We are eager to get law enforcement, we're reinvigorating our efforts with the state, tribal, and local effort, and we would love to have law enforcement involvement on that committee from multiple states, because you're such key players and you were in this from the beginning, and you deserve to be at the table as we move forward with these integrations across domains, because incidents that you deal with in law enforcement cut across, multiple domains, and we need your leadership and guidance on our Tiger team to make that happen. So the bottom line is lower cost of development. We're enhancing your workflow and your mission capabilities because of the understanding of the data, and there's consistency. The common vocabulary that I call the Rosetta Stone, that's what allows you to have, just a few interfaces between your vendors' products instead of one for each one, so you don't have to maintain all that. So maintenance is reduced, and rapid implementation, interoperability, all reuse, many banners we can run up the flagpole here on reasons to use NEIM, and we are here to support you in making this business case clear to your decision makers at the highest level, and helping your developers understand why this is a option that really should be considered when you're developing your exchanges.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I just want to add a point about the cost model, because this really, in the end, is what matters to a lot of people, the practitioner community, are worrying about the cost of this in particular, but also the industry players that are having to do this in their projects. We have evidence from actual studies that using NEIM can reduce your costs by 50% and the time to develop by 50%. A study was done in Missouri, but as the courts implemented an IEPD based on NEIM, and we actually documented what it took versus what the estimates were without using NEIM. Also, even the European Union did a project to exchange warrant information among the 26 countries in the European Union, and they documented the same findings, that they saved about half the cost and half the time to get to market with an answer using NEIM. It's just really certainly true that if you have more than two sharing partners, once using NEIM, if you build that sharing capability with one other partner, then adding the third and subsequent sharing partners is almost a free good. It takes hardly anything to make that happen from the perspective of the exchange itself, anyway, to make that happen. So this is really a way to solve a lot of the enterprise problems that we've faced for many years along criminal justice as an enterprise. When you talk about sharing data from police to prosecutor to courts to corrections, those fundamental message exchanges can be passed around and shared extensively. We did a study at one point that shows that in any typical law enforcement incident, there are really like 51 or 21 customers for a law enforcement incident report. And if you build this in NEIM, you're going to solve a lot of problems of making that available, whether it's for neighbors or just sharing between agencies or other purposes. So this is kind of the business case that makes this, in the minds of many people, a no-brainer.
Yeah, Paul, I wanted to add, I'm really heartened to see several requests in chat to get involved in our Tiger team, state, tribal, local, territorial team. That's great, because that's the best way to help spread the word, is to get involved. And just shoot us an email and we'll make sure that happens.
Yes, and a little later, you're going to have Mike's and my email address, and we just want to hear from you. I want to sort of end this with one success story that's very important. This is another one that I just played the primary role in. Years ago, the Association of practitioners that run the prescription drug monitoring programs around the country came to us and said, you know, we've got this problem that in every state there's a law now that requires pharmacies to report the sale of controlled substances to the state and build a database at the state level. But there was no way to handle the cross-state exchange of this information. And because all of these systems were single silos within each state. And the association talked with us about this, and with some urging from the Justice Department said, well, can we build a NEIM exchange that will allow us to go across state lines? The problem that we're facing is that with the opioid crisis and other drug problems, we know that people in one state, after they've exhausted their ability to get opioids from doctors in their state, might go to the nearby state and ask for prescriptions from other doctors. They're in effect doctor shopping. Also, there are false prescriptions written by people selling prescriptions illegally. So both law enforcement and substance abuse agencies really wanted some way to be able to inquire into the adjacent states' record systems. And I just helped build and implement first a prototype and then a system for exchanging this data across state lines that was based on NEIM. The Association of Drug Prescription Managers throughout the country that was formed was the operational customer for this, and they helped design a NEIM conformant exchange, and that's still in use today. And IJIS is still operating that exchange. The last I heard, there were 36 states that were taking advantage of this. So this is a very practical, useful tool that was only made possible by the use of NEIM to cross state lines. And it allows those drug monitors, both substance abuse agencies and law enforcement, to see across state lines. So this is a very useful and positive real world application that's still going on today and will continue. Katherine, do you want to talk about some of the reference material that we have available?
Absolutely. I'll sure give it a try. I hope that my audio is better now. So what we've provided in the deck are this and the next slide to give you resources and ways to reach out to us. Our premier site, NEIM.gov, is where I would have you start any of your adventures in NEIM. All of the access to training, technical materials, how to reach in and contact the NEIM Management Office, all can be reached through there. I've also provided some direct links for the training materials on GitHub and the technical resources. For those of you who are already using NEIM, you're probably already familiar with the current release. Information is posted, and it's all open source. To go back to Paul's point about cost, so NEIM does not have any licensing cost whatsoever. NEIM itself is free. We recognize that there is a cost to development, but you do not have to pay for the reference model or the tools. Those are all provided at the community. The IEPD developer resources, so there are examples as well as IEPDs that are available for download and reuse. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the implementation support, if you need it, reach into the NEIM Management Office. We'll do our best to help you and provide you the resources you need. And then finally, on the NEIM.gov site, there's a list of tools, not just the ones that the NEIM Management Office has developed, but also from other open source tool makers who are providing those to the community. So we're very excited to be able to host those and make them available to you. And finally, so if you need to reach out to any of us, myself and Steve Sullivan, who's not on the call, are in the NEIM Management Office, and our contact information there, and of course, Mike and Paul's information here. And then the plethora of social media that we have. You should, and we hope that you do, get involved in the conversation. We have NEIM.gov, GitHub. We have several additional videos on YouTube. We have a healthy LinkedIn forum where the conversation continues. And of course, you can subscribe to our Twitter feed to get latest and greatest information, such as right now we have Best of NEIM Awards to recognize some of those great implementations. And we will recognize you at our annual meeting, which will happen in September.
And
thank you, Paul.
Thank you. And I want to remind everybody that the Best of NEIM deadline for submitting nominations has been extended to August 6th. So if you're working on a NEIM Exchange or have implemented one, you can go to the website and just apply for the Best of NEIM Award, which is a very prestigious award. But we want to close with some more specifics about the Tiger team. That Mike and I are very eager to turn this into a two-way street. We're not here just to lecture you on how to do NEIM or how to do these things, but really to collect your wisdom to pass it back on to the management office and the various committees on what's needed and to improve NEIM and to make it more useful and usable throughout the state, local, tribal, and territorial world of information exchanges. We're looking, Mike and I are seriously trying to identify some priority scenarios that haven't yet been solved, that have potential application in the state, local, tribal, and territorial world, and see if we can generate some enthusiasm for building those exchanges and making this happen. We're doing things like discussing with the federal agencies about the idea that restoring the special conditions on grants that were once in place so that if you got a DOJ or DHS grant, you had a special condition that said you must use NEIM and support the submission to a central repository. So we're working on those kinds of issues, and we really want your input. Whether you feel like the need to join us or not, we'd still like to hear from you. But to answer some of the points that Mike was just making and from your entries in the chat, we're eager to have you join our Tiger team. If you have an interest in helping, move this forward to get more engagement on the part of state and local, tribal, and territorial governments. And if you're a government person or an industry person, we want everybody to be represented in this Tiger team. And we're spending some good time in the Tiger team figuring out how to make this all more palatable to the state, local, tribal, and territorial world. And we're open to your suggestions and input and requests and what have you. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to any questions that you may have that you want to ask. And I'm going to stop my sharing. We'll try to answer some of the things in the chat and let Maria ask the questions, which she always has some good questions.
I do have a couple of questions for you, Paul. I did note that several of the comments in the chat room were just that, and some volunteers looking forward to getting engaged. So I'll address what are some of the questions that from an organization we'd be interested in. So a couple things. First of all, I'm pleased to see that so many more domains have become part of the model. As you make reference to the IJIS history, we certainly started with far fewer, and I am so glad to know that there has been a continued support and evolution to include many more domains. To that end, I remember well from personal experience that adoption and usage was always something that was one of the greater challenges that we had, partly because we didn't know who was necessarily using it, and partly because it was very hard to always keep on top of that that education and messaging to the states and locals. And I applaud you for trying to engage and getting involvement on the Tiger team, because I think that's a perfect way of doing it. Are you seeing, the question is this, are you seeing that the increase in domains is actually bolstering the participation of each of those participating domains? Because now there's a greater value to potentially access that data for enhanced operational purposes?
Definitely. I think we see an interesting example of that is the cyber domain, you know, as we actually have had several conversations with the people running the cyber domain about how to make this, how to expose the IEPDs they're writing to the state, local, tribal, and territorial world, and how to do training for SLTT agencies and developers on the cyber exchanges that are going to be coming out in September. We've actually got some plans in place to just take that to work. We've talked with the biometric domain about how to make some of the work that they've been doing more accessible and usable at the state, local, tribal, territorial levels. So yeah, there's as these domains have matured and emerged, there's much more interest in expanding their applicability across the whole spectrum of the user community, federal, state, local, et cetera. So it does feed on each other. Once you do something good in one place, people tend to want to take advantage of it. We can't afford to keep reinventing the wheel in this field.
Totally agree. And another question would be from a perspective of the domains. Are you seeing that there are some domains that you're looking to engage, but may have a greater challenge with the change process and getting engaged? Are there any that the IJIS community could help with that we might be already involved with?
Yes, that's a really good question, and that's true. And I'll own up to this. I don't want to put Katherine on the spot about this, but we're kind of disappointed in the outreach and progress made by the Department of Health and Human Services. Really, the health domain that was originally stood up by the CIO in the Department of Health and Human Services has really not gone anywhere, and the human services domain has been faltering. So yes, involvement from IJIS members and interest in helping them understand the value of NEIM and how it can be used. I know one of the IJIS companies did a study of how the health domain and the justice domain could be mapped together, and I just did some of that work in the early days. There's more work that needs to be done there to map HL7 to NEIM, for example, and the new fire specifications in healthcare to NEIM. We need industry to help with that, and that's really people need to jump on that bandwagon. There's more money than available these days, thanks to recent federal funding, to do a lot of these things, but we need to energize policymakers and executives at the federal government as well as state and local government to take advantage of this technology.
Excellent. And I know that we are in the process of scheduling a session, but I guess the question for then the audience and the community entire is, how is it that you all envision IJIS helping in the future? And obviously, anything we could do to help, we would like to support the cause.
Well, that's really great to hear. And I know that if Katherine's video was working, she'd be clapping, because she needs the help of all the stakeholder communities. And IJIS has been such an important part of this over the years that it's the place where more gets done than probably any other institution in terms of supporting NEIM activities. Ashwini pointed out there's some other really important projects in corrections and victim notification that, you know, creating the UML profile of NEIM, which became an OMG standard, was an important part of this. So we need to keep that focus alive and do what we can. Industry needs to drive this a lot more than anybody else. And to answer Ashwini's question is, the NEIM cyber domain working to sign with OASIS standards, sticks and tasking. Absolutely, they're taking that into account. In fact, there's more work to be done in actually making all of NEIM aligned more with OASIS.
Wonderful. Any parting words of wisdom? Because if not, I'm going to thank all three panelists and share my appreciation for your valuable contribution to the first day of the mid-year briefing.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate it. For the audience, we thank you for participating with us for the full day. Just to tie up some messages for all of the sessions and to move forward on the planning for tomorrow, I'll just spend a couple of minutes without taking too much of your time. Not surprisingly, data and the criticality for partnerships, engaged partnerships and effective partnerships was seen as the critical success factors that seem to be the thread throughout each of the presentations. Though that might have been where we put the bet, that was definitely not something that we laid the seeds in each of the conversations, but that is the focal messages that came out from each of our speakers. Some of the other themes that I suspect will continue tomorrow is the need for training and education, the need for policy awareness, not only the respect of those policies, but the awareness of the new policies and/or legislations that are happening on a federal, state, or local levels. And then most fundamentally, probably the hardest challenge to understand how to grapple with or to succeed at is the cultural change or the change management process. And again, that's something that cannot be done in a silo nor in a vacuum, but must be done with partnerships and with a comprehensive approach. So we hope that the perspectives that were shared with you today were of value to you and gave you pause and gave you consideration to think a little bit further than what we are able to do on a daily basis. And that our program tomorrow that I'll give you some highlights for will do the same. We start the day off with a keynote address from the senior advisor for the Assistant Attorney General, US DOJ, Phelan Wyrick. He will speak to us with regard to the administration's definitions or defined priorities. Certainly can't speak necessarily to where they are in that process because the administration is very new, but certainly he will share with us all the information that is available to share. We will have other practitioners representing different domains. We started today with what was law enforcement and the courts. Tomorrow we have representatives from corrections and parole and probation, Tom Herzog and Marcus Hodges. Both names that should be familiar to most of the IJIS community. We then follow it with another keynote address. Senator Camara Bartolotta from the state of Pennsylvania will chat with us with regard to what they are doing in the state, some of their legislative priorities, and where they've already made some progress and where their priorities could theoretically engage the IJIS community. We then follow it with yet another contribution from our member groups, speaking to a case study dealing with analytics across the domain. Going back to that theme of data, data is only valuable if you can improve the operational outcomes. And to that end, being able to share and have tools to be able to share across the domain effectively are, of course, more productive. We have representatives from SAS and representatives from the New Jersey State Police as their case study that will chat with us about different versions of data sharing. And then we have more practitioner organizations, more practitioner membership groups that will be able to speak to us about the challenges that they are witnessing, the policies and/or challenges that they are facing, and their experiences thereafter. We have representatives from IACP, from APPA, from National Center for State Courts, as well as a partner of Brooks, Borden, and Moore. We end the day with what are two report outs from our committee work that speak to efforts that, again, data-centric, speak to how we might be able to improve the access to data and the ability to share across domains. The first is a person-centric group or excuse me, a person-centric program that we will chat about. One of the committees will provide their progress update on that. And the second is efforts that are being made to support the report out from National Academy of Sciences in support of crime modernization efforts. Both of those are representative of several of the different activities that happen within our community and are valuable not only for the viewing pleasure, the participant pleasure of those part of the mid-year briefing, but are in direct support of reform and ultimately improving the operational outcomes. So we hope that you are able to engage with us tomorrow. We start the day at 10 a.m. And before I close, I would like to remind you, if Alex has not already put the link in our chat box, I would ask him to do so in order to urge you to participate in what is our evaluation instrument. We would need to understand that these activities, the mid-year briefing, these events are in fact meeting the mark and are effective for your purposes. To incentivize you to participate in the evaluation, we are going to award to a random player a Fire Kindle from Amazon. We will select one randomly from those that actually fill out the application or fill out the evaluation form. So I would urge you to do so. This will be a great prize, but of greater import, of greater value is that we are aware of how we can better meet your needs, what your priorities are, and how we as the collective community could do a better job in addressing the reform needs within the criminal justice environment. So I thank you very much for participating. I look forward to engaging you tomorrow. I will remind you that we start at 10. And again, thank you very much. Take care, folks.